My husband's mother has always been a control freak, and she's made our lives an absolute nightmare. It got so bad that I finally gave my husband an ultimatum, which sent her spiraling into such a rage that she ended up getting arrested for assaulting me. Despite all this, my husband remains the ultimate mama's boy. Even after 3 years of marriage, he still runs to her with every little problem we have. If we argue about something as trivial as the dirty dishes, he'll call her to complain about me. If we can't agree on a movie to watch, he'll reach out to her so she can persuade me to go along with his choice. But the worst part is that he asks for her permission to do almost anything. For instance, if we have a date night planned, he'll call her to ask if it's okay for him to go out. Just last week, she told him it was too late to go to a restaurant with me at 9 p.m., and he obediently canceled our reservation. She even calls him every night at 10:30 on the dot to remind him it's bedtime, and without fail, he listens to her, even if it disrupts whatever we're doing. I used to confront him about it, but instead of talking to me, he would just call his mom and have her explain to me why their relationship is the way it is. Once I managed to convince him to try standing up to her, but he called her, only to come back to me 20 minutes later, berating me for trying to manipulate and control him. I think it's important to share specific examples to fully grasp just how crazy his mother is. When John and I were dating, we planned a romantic weekend getaway. I was so excited, imagining a cozy cabin in the mountains where we could enjoy some much-needed alone time. But before we even finalized the details, John said he needed to check with his mom first. I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being considerate. Maybe she was protective because he's her only child, I thought. But then he actually called her to ask if we could stay at the cabin. She told him no, saying it was way too dangerous, and that her precious boy wasn't used to being so far away from her. He took her word for it, and told me we couldn't go. When I asked if he even wanted to go, he shrugged and said it didn't matter whether he wanted to or not. His mother said no, and that was the end of it. We ended up staying at my house for the weekend, as it was the only place his mother deemed safe. That was a huge red flag, and I regret not paying more attention to it. While we were dating, there were countless times during our dates when his mother would call him, sometimes more than once, just to check in or remind him of something trivial like taking his vitamins or avoiding certain foods. I brushed it off as quirky, thinking that once we were married, he'd set boundaries and she'd back off. But here we are, years into our marriage, and nothing has changed. Linda is just as overprotective as she was when we first started dating, if not more. Things finally came to a head on our 3rd wedding anniversary. I had planned a romantic evening for us, dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date, followed by a night at a cozy little BB just out of town. I was so excited to surprise him, but when I got home, John wasn't there. I called him and quickly realized he had forgotten our anniversary. He was out having dinner with his mom because she had a rough day and needed company. When John finally came home, I was furious. Our anniversary was supposed to be special, and I tried to explain how much this day meant to me, but it turned into a shouting match. I was fed up not just with the anniversary, but with everything: his mother's constant interference, his inability to see how it was tearing us apart, and his refusal to put our marriage first. I could see him growing defensive, as if we were falling into the same exhausting pattern again. He would always find some way to justify his mother's actions, leaving me feeling unheard and undervalued. After our massive fight, instead of apologizing or even attempting to make things right, he did what he always does: he called his mom. From the next room, I could hear him telling her how unreasonable I was being, how I didn't understand their relationship, and how I was blowing things out of proportion. That was the final straw. I stormed into the room, grabbed the phone out of his hand, and told Linda that she needed to stop interfering in our marriage. I told her if she wanted to boss someone around, she should find her own man. Linda was furious, of course. She accused me of being jealous of their close relationship and trying to come between them. We had a huge argument right there on the phone, with John standing between us like a deer caught in headlights. But Linda wasn't just angry, she was vindictive. The next day, she showed up at our house unannounced, not even bothering to knock, as if she owned the place. She acted like nothing had happened and said she was there to visit us. At dinner, things escalated. I had spent the entire afternoon making one of John's favorite dishes, spicy chicken curry, knowing he loved it with an extra kick. As we all sat at the table, I watched Linda take her first bite. Her face immediately tightened, and she put her fork down, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin as if the food had offended her. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said the food was too spicy and that I should tone down the heat. Then she turned to John and asked him how he could eat something like this, adding that such spicy food wasn't good for his stomach. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly torn, and then suggested that we get takeout to make everyone happy. But I didn't want takeout. I had spent hours cooking and was ready to enjoy the meal I'd prepared. Linda insisted she needed something else to eat, claiming again that my cooking was too spicy, and made it clear she wouldn't eat my curry. The following week, Linda asked John to meet her at a coffee shop to spend some time together, despite the fact that John and I had already made plans. John told her he could meet her after our date, but she was persistent. She even suggested that I come along, saying it had been too long since they'd had mother-son time. When we arrived at the coffee shop, Linda was already seated. She greeted John warmly and barely acknowledged me as I slid into the seat next to him. I could feel her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I was wearing a simple sundress and sandals, and as soon as we ordered, Linda leaned back in her chair and said, "Well, isn't that an interesting choice? Not many people would dare to wear something like that nowadays, but you don't care about standing out, do you?" I forced a smile, trying to brush off her passive-aggressive comment. But things took a turn for the worse when Linda got violent. When I finally decided to put my foot down and told her to stay out of our lives, she lost it. She actually pushed me and grabbed my hair. The police were called, and Linda was arrested for assault. John was in shock. He couldn't believe how far his mother had gone. For the first time, he saw how toxic her behavior really was. He went to visit her in jail, hoping to talk some sense into her, but she refused to apologize. She told him he was making a huge mistake and that he would regret choosing me over her. As time went on, it felt like Linda was trying to push me out of my own relationship, trying to take over as the woman of the house. Whenever I tried to stand up for myself, John would side with his mom, saying things like, "She's just trying to help," or "You know she means well." Linda's intrusions into our lives only grew more intense. It was no longer just about controlling John. She began extending her reach into every aspect of my life, too. It started subtly at first. During one of her frequent visits, Linda casually mentioned that John should be eating more vegetables and suggested I prepare healthier meals for him. "You know, John used to love my spinach casserole," she said with a smile, implying that my cooking wasn't up to par. The message was clear: I wasn't feeding him properly, and it was my responsibility to fix that. But it didn't stop there. One evening, as I was getting ready for a date night with John, Linda unexpectedly dropped by. She took one look at my outfit and pursed her lips before asking, "Is that what you're wearing on a date with John?" Though it wasn't really a question, she went on to suggest that something more conservative or classy would be more appropriate for the evening, making me second-guess my choice of outfit, even though I had always felt confident in it before. The final straw came one night when Linda stayed over after dinner. As we were saying our goodnights, she casually mentioned that John always performed best at work when he got at least 8 hours of sleep, and suggested that we both be in bed by 10. Her tone made it sound less like advice and more like a command. I could hardly believe it. She was dictating my bedtime as if I were a child. I began to dread her visits, knowing they would come with another round of criticisms and suggestions. It felt like living with a dictator. The worst part was that John didn't see anything wrong with it. He thought his mom was just being caring and concerned. But I knew better. She was trying to control every aspect of our lives, and I was fed up. Finally, I told John he needed to choose me or his mom. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I told him that I married him, not his mom, and that I wasn't going to continue in a marriage where she controlled everything. John was devastated. He tried to convince me that we could all get along and that I just needed to be more understanding, but I stood firm. I told him that if he didn't set boundaries with his mom, I was done. John reluctantly agreed to talk to her, but when he did, all hell broke loose. Linda was furious. She told him he should never choose his wife over his own mother, and even threatened to cut him off if he didn't do what she said. John was torn. He loved his mom but didn't want to lose me either. He was stuck in the middle, and it was tearing him apart. Linda started spreading lies about me to our friends and family, claiming that I was trying to break up the family and drive a wedge between her and John. One evening, while I was cleaning up the kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was John's cousin, Sarah. She mentioned she'd heard some things from Linda and wanted to check if they were true. My heart sank as Sarah relayed everything Linda had claimed: that I wasn't taking care of John properly, wasn't cooking the way I should, was dressing inappropriately, and was keeping him up late, which was affecting his work. I explained the situation to Sarah, telling her how Linda had been overstepping and imposing her expectations on me. I could sense Sarah's discomfort, but by the end of the call she seemed to understand. However, things escalated even further when Linda took her vendetta against me to a new level. She called my workplace, making false complaints about me. I was called into my boss's office and told there had been some concerning reports about my behavior. I was blindsided. I'd always maintained a strong work ethic and had never received negative feedback before. As my manager continued, it became clear that the complaint had been detailed and specific, citing supposed issues with how I interacted with colleagues and handled my responsibilities. The kicker came when they mentioned that the complaint had originated from a phone call someone claiming to be a concerned family member who wanted to ensure I was performing at my best. It didn't take long for me to piece it together. As a result of the complaint, I was required to take a mandatory workplace conduct training course. It felt like a slap in the face, being forced to sit through a class on skills I knew I already had all because Linda had decided to poison the well at my job. She almost cost me my job, and I was terrified. That's when I decided to get a restraining order against Linda. I knew it would be a drastic step, but I didn't know what else to do.